Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast, bringing you a forecast about the Mars-Venus conjunction in Aquarius that's exacting on February 21st. And to get into that, we're also going to be talking about the North Node Chiron conjunction in Aries that exacted yesterday, February 19th. So ever since this new moon in Aquarius, there's been a re-up or a reverb of this kind of revolutionary feeling in the air, this sense of tuning into our ideals or what we would like life to become, like these changes that are brewing, that we're wanting to bring it into our own lives, into our communities, and perhaps on a larger scale than that. But if you follow my channel, you know that I tend to focus on the personal and the micro. So when I've been thinking about this Aquarian energy, I've been thinking about it a lot in terms of, internal paradigm shifts, right? If you think about bigger changes that you want to make in your life, ways that you want to tap into your authenticity even, right? Like when I think about Aquarius at a deep level, we're not just becoming something totally foreign from ourselves. We're actually becoming this like incandescent light bulb, like all the way on, like fully online version of ourselves. And that means that we are transforming and shedding some of our false selves or inauthentic selves to do that, which can still be a really big transformation, but you end up coming home to something that's like hyper you, not something that is like far away from you, but it may be something that feels far away from what you've known so far. So perhaps you have something in mind, something brewing, some kind of change you want in your life, and it feels like that would be really different. A lot of things would have to change for me to get there. So let me back up and talk to you a little bit about the transits that I'm tuning into. I'll just take a moment too to welcome you to my channel, invite you to please like this video and subscribe. And if you're listening on Magic of the Spheres podcast, please leave a 5-star on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts. I would really appreciate that. It helps the algorithm and helps more people find this content. So we had yesterday, I'm recording this on February 20th. We had yesterday this conjunction exact between Chiron and Aries and the North Node in Aries. This has been building for a while. They've been close for a while, so it's not exactly a new story, but there may have been something in the air, especially this week, where these themes kind of became maybe more heightened. I know for me, it helped to just kind of be reminded of it because it's a transit that I've been feeling and sensing into for a while. But we have this conjunction in Aries, so it's ruled by Mars, who's in Aquarius, and we have Venus and Mars conjunct in Aquarius that will exact on February 21st, tomorrow. So just to start out with what Chiron and the North Node in Aries represents, we have, Chiron is most commonly known as like the wounded healer. It's this asteroid that is in between Saturn and then the outer planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So it can be these experiences that shake up our sense of reality, who we are, often some kind of wound or initiation that leads us into philosophy or study or knowledge, like to try to figure it out, to try to heal. So Chiron, wherever it is, will represent kind of a nature of the wound that's up for the collective, right? If we're looking at it by transit. And of course, in your natal chart, Chiron will speak to that unique kind of pain point, but it's also a place of medicine, right? So it's a place where you might actually have a lot of skill as a healer in some way, or, not everyone identifies as a healer or practices in a healing practitioner kind of way. But let's say that I have Chiron and Leo. So the image that came to mind was like a theater teacher, where it's like someone who's teaching theater is not necessarily going around saying that they're a healer, but they may actually be helping people liberate their creativity and their spontaneity, and they're doing healing work in the nature of Leo, even if it's not necessarily so explicit. So when we have Chiron and Aries for the collective, there's a few themes. I'll also just share that the North Node is like the collective direction where things are pointed. We're coming from that South Node in Libra past. So there's some things that are being kicked up right now around justice, right? Things feeling fair or unfair. And that can be as small as things that are happening in our own internal consciousness, like our own scales, like weighing of things. It can be in our relationships also, where we feel slighted or missed, or there's like this thing being kicked up around how to create better harmony, how to create better relationship. The thing with South Node in Libra is that the pattern with that is that there could have been an overdependence on working things out or getting along. North Node in Aries is like, stand up for yourself, be erect, like know who you are and walk your own path. So Chiron and Aries, and a pain point kind of in connection to that, if we also think about the North Node as, you know, the mythic head of a dragon, the dragon head and body have been severed. So there's this quality of Rahu where the North Node where it's hungry, right? So a few ways that I'm looking at this and things you might notice about this current field with Chiron in the North Node. One is that there's something around our separateness. Like Aries is like, I am me, like I am distinct, right? And how that is connected to woundedness. So if there's a way that, you know, you're going through something where it feels like no one understands or no one shares that experience, or you feel alone for some reason in it, that would be something that gets kicked up. But it could also be that, you know, there's these parts of self that we have actually disidentified with, like they're not part of our sense of self, and that there's a healing journey of bringing those parts back. So one way that I like to think about that is like the parts of you that are like really taboo or edgy to you, right? Where it's like you don't like how obsessive you get, the things that maybe you're ashamed about, those parts of you that you want to disavow, that you don't want to be connected to. Where did that separation begin? What was the first, you know, set of conditionings? The first time that someone said, you know, something to you to the effect of like, it's not okay to be the way that you are. And then you split from that part of you. And then we have all these experiences where that part of us is trying to come back home through these experiences that are actually awakening us back into contact with what we've split off from. And then there's another element, I think, of this Chiron-North Node conjunction in Aries about taking things really personally, right? Like being personally offended and insulted by things that actually have nothing to do with us. And to just kind of feel into like, why is that? You know, why does our egoic consciousness want something to be upset about? Why does our egoic consciousness want something to be mad about, to have a whole process or kind of like fit about, right? And so we might look at it as like, there's something within the Martian or the Aries experience where when you have fight, when you access fire, it allows you to move in a direction. So you might be stuck in the mud. You might be really disenchanted or jaded or depressed. And there's like a lower kind of molassesy frequency to that. And when you get angry, like when you have something to be mad about, when you have something to be insulted about, right, it's going to give you maybe some energy to get to a different position. So that's not to say that it's necessary actually to believe that kind of consciousness that's rising up that wants to be personally offended and insulted by things, but to actually just look at that part if it's coming up of like, why do I want to be aggravated? Like, what can my fire actually be useful for? So I think that actually is a good segue into the Mars-Venus conjunction in Aquarius, which is ruling the, Mars is ruling that North Node in Aries right now. And these are some of my thoughts about it. So one is that Aquarius is a very organized consciousness, right? Aquarius is tuning into frequencies in the same way that you could be driving in your car and tuning the radio knob and just picking up different stations that are whole and complete in themselves. You just turn the knob and then suddenly you're in a different reality through that station that's coming into your radio. So we all are the kind of those radios. We can pick up stations, right? So on the one hand, you could view your thoughts as like originating from your brain, that it's like a private experience, or you're picking up on a field of consciousness. And there's actually some blend of the two in the way that, you know, our own body, nervous system, is kind of what's tuning the radio station in a way, right? Where you pick up on what you are able to pick up on. And if you want to change what you're picking up on, if you change the structure of your consciousness and how your default radio station is set, you'll have a different experience of what you're able to channel and pick up, right? But so I want to highlight kind of these two things there of like, on the one hand, there are these whole and complete entire stations that you can pick up on. And you still have to do the work to cultivate your consciousness and cultivate your the structure of how your consciousness is to support that channeling process. Then we put Venus and Mars together in Aquarius, right? So the way that I see that is that there's like an effort or a struggle right now to have thoughts that properly defend and uphold the Venusian sphere of life, right? Like, what brings you joy, happiness, like what fills you and your heart up with love? What makes you feel like connecting with people? What makes you want to like open your heart to the relational experiences that are available to you? Of course, with people, but also Aquarius is like our whole kind of human and non-human communities and realms. And if we have this really strong sense of woundedness that's coming up, I'm alone, I'm separate, I've been wronged, me versus them, you can see how those things aren't necessarily conducive to Venus, right? It's conducive perhaps to setting boundaries or being separate or being alone. But what about these kind of discernments and distinctions about who you do want to be in community with? What kinds of relational experiences you want to be having? And Aquarius can be like a time for reality checks in that regard, of looking around at like, what is the state of my heart as it lives inside of me, like my internal heartscape, but also like what's happening in my community, in my friendships. Do I feel isolated and whatnot? And that, yes, there is something with Aquarius about making connection, right? Like, I think social media at its highest is like you can put your ideas out there and find someone else who resonates or connects. Maybe it's not even social media, but some kind of like listserv or group or something like that, where you have a need or a want and you put it out there to the field and someone responds to it. So that happens with our actual words, the things that we put out there, but we're also emitting frequencies at a more subconscious level and being mirrored and reflected by life at that deeper level too. So if you look at what's happening, what's actually concretely around you, and take it personally in a medicinal way, right? Not personally in like the ruffled, like wounded way, but personally in the sense of like, how did I create this? How did I call this in? And also, how do I have the power personally with my own agency to change that? So I think that's kind of what Mars, the struggle is with that conjunction right now is, are our troops in terms of our consciousness, the way our consciousness is structured, actually moving us in the direction and making the connections that we want to make? Another point I wanted to make around this was that we have thoughts all day, right? And these thoughts are things that you might feel really merged with, like you believe them or they're kind of unconscious, or it's like a thought that you witness it and you can hear it and see it from a distance, which is a little bit more Aquarian. And not all thoughts are really supportive or like support where we want to go. And if we have this activated woundedness right now with the North Node in Chiron and Aries, it could be examining where, say like, if your consciousness is really strong in certain ways around self-worth, for example, you could go through a breakup and have grief about it, experience self-reflection and maybe some lessons from it. But ultimately, it might not send you into a tailspin of like these, like, what's wrong with me? Or why am I not lovable? Why did they leave me? Like those kind of questions. But if you already have a really strong self-worth wound and you go through a breakup, it's like, why did they leave me? What's wrong with me? Right. And you start going into that kind of tailspin of consciousness. So those things are reversible. But we have to basically expand and elevate our mind and think in different ways. So if you notice the wounds or the types of unhelpful thinking that's surfacing, the thinking that kind of feels like if you said those things out loud and said them to another person, it would be mean, right? Like those types of consciousness streams, those are the places that are probably being highlighted to us for development and evolution at this time. So this made me think too about Masaru Emoto, the Japanese scientist who wrote a book about how human thoughts and words could alter the structure of water molecules. He would speak to jars of water or write, I don't know if he wrote it like on the jar or on a piece of tape, the word or thought, and you would get these different results that he photographed in magnification. So the water crystals that were told, I love you, were really beautiful and harmonious looking, whereas like a water molecule that you said like I hate you to would look disorganized and disturbing looking. And I want to shout out here my friend Jonathan Coe, because we were talking about this and this connection here between how like air ideas and water feelings, and how our feeling body, like our body that is full of water, actually organizes in relationship to our thoughts and ideas. So this has been something, you know, I've been working with my body as an oracle for years now. And it essentially began because I was studying spirituality and like these different ways of thinking. And I noticed that different thoughts or words would create like a sunken, heavy, molassesy feeling in my body versus like a tingling and an opening in my heart or tingles up my spine. And that I could just actually feel the quality of thoughts. And so if you have that, if you tune into that sensitivity, and I believe we have that power with Aquarius, like you can cultivate it, right? And there's different ways to really refine that relationship with our body, right? To kind of clear any layers that make us less sensitive to that kind of feedback. But essentially, you know, I think this is a kind of technology that we ought to really consider with Aquarius, this internal technology. And so we have detachment. That's one of the key words with Aquarius. And so if you can detach enough from your thoughts and kind of try them on, like throw them out, you know, notice if you're like curdling with resentment and you're like really in that and it's hard to get out, you're kind of stuck in it, and how it's making you feel really heavy, right? Versus if you tune into the thought experiment of like, what if I had bigger love here? What if I saw the bigger picture of how this whole experience was also for me, right? Or what is it preparing me for in my journey? Like these things that I really do want to experience in the future. And this was my initiation. When you start to think in ways that really open it, you know, and this is something that it's not like you just need like a affirmation. You don't just need to slap on a positive thought to something. It's like, can you be authentic with it? And so here actually, I think is a good place to bring in wisdom, and how wisdom is something that helps us organize back to truth. It helps us find our way. So if you have thoughts that are causing you suffering and they're keeping you in a hell realm, you're not necessarily accessing wisdom. You're in your pain, you're in your wounding. When you have access to wisdom, when you find those thoughts and that system of consciousness that allows you to open into a bigger truth, then there's maybe more creative ways to think about the situation and to open the oracle of the body and our capacity to be radio stations to tap into a higher frequency of thought. So essentially, this Mars-Venus conjunction in Aquarius, I think there is like a little bit of a fight at the moment, a little bit of an activation to actually defend and uphold the things that are more idyllic, that are more valuable to us, right? To have some clarity even about how, what matters to you, what your values are. That's a deeply Venusian question. But when you're really tapped into that, really connected to it, you're able to organize information and deal with shocks and disruptions even potentially better. Of course, Aquarius can be quite stubborn, right? Like it's a fixed sign, and we don't want to be dogmatic or totally in illusion. And just, sometimes the issue, I was talking about this in my write-up about the new moon in Aquarius, ideals are not always livable. You can have the ideal of perfection, but you will never be perfect, right? So if you have an ideal that you're always falling short of, it's not really a livable ideal. Ideals, think about something that connects you, like allows you to get to higher places, but you can actually make that contact point, right? If you think about like a television, a telephone, cell phone, right, where you call a number and you actually can reach it, and then the connection is made. You want to think about ideals that are kind of like that, where it's like you can dial them up and then immediately know them and feel them and connect with them and have a direct experience with them. And you can definitely expand, but starting with something that you can actually access, I think is really important for that Aquarian process. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say here about the transits. While I think about that, I'll actually just share with you an announcement that my evolutionary astrology intensive is beginning up again for a new cohort beginning April 2nd. And this is an opportunity to learn about this lineage of astrology evolutionary that I'm the most rooted in my own practice, which resources Pluto and the lunar nodes heavily as a starting point in the natal chart for what you're doing as a soul, the deeper desire nature that you've had in a multi-lifetime journey, the types of strategies that you've held to relate to that desire nature, and then how that's coming up in this life in your most cutting edge evolutionary situations, right? When things really are on the line for you, when you want something, when you really desire something, this is where our Pluto and lunar node story really comes up. So a really beautiful window into the karmic, dharmic journey that we're playing out. And I've often called this school of astrology a wisdom school because it's not just about learning what the chart says, but it's really learning about the deeper evolutionary intentions of the signs, of the planets, and learning their unique medicines and frequencies. I teach my students how to have intuitive relationships to the practice where you have your own direct connection to the archetypes so that you're not just reliant on book learning or memorizing things, but you actually form relationships, and those relationships allow you to have your own unique voice as an astrologer. So you can learn more about this class, how it's structured, what we cover, read student testimonials by following the link in the notes. It's by application only. Applications will be open all month of February. They will close sometime in March. I will note that in the notes. But if you have any questions about the class that are more personal, the course page actually really covers a lot. But if there's something unique to you that you want to ask me, you can send me an email, sabrina@monarchastrology.com, or you can include the question in your application. I get on calls with you to discuss the class and your desire for being there. So that's a great way to talk to me about your learning goals. And then as far as this transit goes, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Just that I feel like there's a deeper galvanizing force right now to exalt our thoughts, right? To like exalt our consciousness and to notice that if you're falling into this pit space, this space where it's like your own personal cavernous, like hell realm, not to be dramatic in my language at all, that, why is the energy going there? We have, life force energy, and there's something about liberating it, especially now that Pluto is in Aquarius, right? So if your life force, your raw life force energy is feeding your wounds, is feeding your resentments, is like feeding these channels of consciousness that don't really give you anything, but just actually take away from you, that now is not necessarily, it's not always necessarily the time to keep unpacking and digesting and digging into that of like, why am I this way? Like sometimes that's helpful, right? But part of it's also just building new pathways, building new architecture, actually putting up supports, investing into experiences, thoughts, states of being that help get you in the direction that you actually want to be going in. And so I think there's actually, I don't know if it's a discipline thing, so much as a constant choice point of like, am I going to feed this wound or this like black hole today? Or am I going to go into the place of my higher vision and the thing that I want to create, the peak experiences I want to have? And so you have to know, you have to get to know yourself very personally. This is why I love teaching astrology and this form of astrology, because it offers so much mapping for that. But you have to know kind of what your very well-worn neural pathways are. Like for me, one of the things that I can get stuck in is like attachment to the past, because I have a Cancer South node. And, you know, this familiarity, like this sense of like, that was such a high season in my life and I want to recreate it, but I can't actually. It's like those things in the past were so wonderful because I was so present. So I always have to remember, step into the choice of like, how can I be present? How can I be creative in the moment and allow myself to be delighted and surprised by what new things want to come into my life? How can I make space for that? Instead of spending my days pining and longing and being in nostalgia and being in grief about something that's not here anymore. That's a really big sinkhole of energy for me personally. And there's been so many times in my life where it was so compelling and so believable. Now it's less believable, but it's still actually just a choice point anytime I'm dipping into that stream to redirect my energy in a healthier direction. But these kinds of things are very personal, actually, just in terms of what channels of consciousness are overused at our, you know, creating diminishing returns for you, because it's actually different for everyone depending on our constitutions and systems and karma and dharma and all of that. So again, wisdom. And yeah, I would love to go deeper into this with you in the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive. One thing I wanted to mention also is that there's a lot of mentorship in the course. I engage my students directly, personally. I am here to help you integrate the material and like talk it through with you or answer your questions about it or dialogue with you in class as things are coming up. Because that's how I learned astrology best and that's how I love to teach it. But I think that modeling it through dialogue and being in the fields together goes a really long way beyond also giving you the building blocks and the teachings that allow you to put things together for yourself, just to be in a space where we actually dive into what's uniquely emerging in the field of the class and in your own comprehension. So again, the link for that is in the notes. Thanks for tuning into this forecast. Let me know in the comments what resonated with you or just say hi, and I'll see you again soon.